All right, we are live today with former General Gregory Touhill, who was the first federal CISO, the first person to hold that job and really get a clear view of everything going on cybersecurity-wise across the federal government. He's joining us today to talk about what he learned while in that position and talk a little bit about his new position. Greg, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks very much for having me.
Of course. So first off, you're about to go out into a new venture. What are you working on these days?
Well, I'm the president of Cyxtera's federal group, and Cyxtera is a large company. It's relatively new, but we specialize in data centers operation as well as cybersecurity software applications that can help make your cybersecurity even smarter.
Excellent. And you're also doing some work with a couple of boards out there, correct?
Right. I serve on the board of Bay Dynamics, a great company that takes a look at quantifying and qualifying and giving you visualization over your cyber risk posture. I also teach at Carnegie Mellon University. I'm on several advisory boards, and I also serve on the board of CyberSponse, which is a cyber orchestration tool company.
Excellent, excellent. Orchestration, I love that term. You know, they find that balance between automation and people and keeping everything moving correctly.
Right, and you got to choreograph activities, and the more complicated things are, you really do need capabilities that are going to simplify and make your life easier as you go to manage risk.
Excellent. So let's jump right in then. As I said off the top, you know, I think you had a unique position in the fact that you were the first federal CISO and so far the only person to hold that job post. What kind of view did you get of the cybersecurity landscape across the federal government while you were in office there?
Well, you know, frankly, I came to the office having already served over 30 years in the military, so the .mil domain. So coming into the .gov domain, I actually got a head start on the federal CISO position by having served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Homeland Security. And during that period of time, I also was dual-hatted as the director of the NCIC, the National Cybersecurity and Communications Integration Center. And that's a long mouthful, so I'm just going to call it the NCIC from here on in. So I had a unique perspective of having deep experience in both .mil and in the .gov sectors. And frankly, as I take a look at .gov and .mil, there's great opportunity space to improve things. We spent a lot of time in the military side of the house doing a lot of integration and consolidation of activities, a lot of shared service, but on a scale that was really epic. It hadn't been done before in the private sector at the same scale as we had done in the .mil or .gov space, or even in the private sector. So we were doing enterprise things that were really cutting edge at the time. And since that time, I learned that, you know what, we had success in the military in a lot of things. We had some stunning not successes that we learned along the way. But it's important now for the .gov space to take those lessons learned from both the private sector as well as the .mil and to do a better job. And one of the big problems I saw in the .gov was the architecture is based on a 1980s organization chart. Everybody's doing their own thing. You've got silos of excellence, and then you've got silos that aren't so excellent. We need to do a better job of changing the architecture and making sure that we are, in fact, following best practices. We are doing shared services. We are leveraging the best practices from the cloud. There's plenty of opportunity space out there.
You mentioned shared services. I was really heartened to see that in President Trump's executive order on cybersecurity. You know, that was one of the things, shared services, and a few other more technical, policy wonkish kind of things that you don't normally see in a cybersecurity realm. It was interesting. Felt more like a government document than a private sector document. What are your thoughts on the cyber EO? Was there anything that was missing from it, or any parts that it didn't really address well enough?
Well, that's a really good question. And first of all, I want to say that I was really pleased to see the EO come out, because frankly, I think it built on a lot of the work that had been done during the Bush administrations and then later on in the Obama administrations. And you know, recognizing the fact that, you know, I served in the federal government since the early 80s, I've seen growth in this area, and it builds upon things that we'd already been plotting and planning for. And it provides a continuum of lessons learned. So I was very positive on it. Now, that said, there was a lot of stuff in there where, you know, you could argue that, hey, is calling for like 12 different reports and studies. And I think it's fair that any new administration gets a lay of the land and tries to figure out what's going on. But I certainly hope that this administration is reading the studies and the like that we did and then our predecessors did, so that we're not reinventing the wheel and we're not wasting a whole lot of time. This really I saw as a continuation of the stuff that my team did, as well as the ones that came before us. And as long as we go out and embrace best practices, we further our actions to change and improve the federal IT architecture, and we look at things as an enterprise risk management issue and not just chasing technology, I think the people of the United States would be better served.
Yeah. You know, you also mentioned, as you were talking about shared services and that movement, that sounds a lot like the CDM program. Is that the one you were thinking of?
Well, CDM is just part of it, Aaron. You know, CDM, we were trying to do three things. One is we were trying to make sure that everybody knew what's on their network. Two, and this is CDM phase 2, is who's on your network. And number 3, that's CDM phase 3, what's going on your network. You know, frankly, when I came over to the civilian government, I was a little bit disappointed. I was more than a little bit disappointed that we didn't already have the answers to those 3 things. But that's the reason why we had CDM. This is so that we could, in fact, have positive control over our networks. And that's something we had been working in the .mil for about 10 years. And we still hadn't necessarily gotten it fully right. Now, that said, there's so many different things that can be done and should be done. But the IT architecture we have right now, with everybody doing their own thing, is not sufficient to meet everybody's needs.
Yeah, and you know, personally, it's one of the things I like about the CDM, that it kind of does build a framework of what you need to do to have a robust, mature cybersecurity posture. And it also gave the acquisition tools to get that moving quickly. Unfortunately, we haven't actually seen it move quickly. You also mentioned that the .mil went through some similar troubles. You know, you've been working on it for 10 years and they aren't quite there. What's taking so long? Why does this keep getting held up?
Well, you know, part of the problem was for CDM phase 1, knowing what's on your network. Sadly, most federal agencies did not have a good handle on that. And if you look at the private sector, same type of problems. They just don't. They're not as transparent as what the U.S. government is. So
yeah, they don't have FISMA reports.
Well, or other kind of reports like that. You know, so what we did is when we were building out the CDM program under the great leadership of guys like John Stroyford and Danny Toller, and Mark Nightinger, and others, you know, we already knew that departments and agencies really didn't have as firm a grip and handle on their inventories and who was connected and what was connected. So we went out as a strategy and said, all right, departments and agencies, tell us what you have so that we can go and order the appropriate number of licensing. And they came back with their numbers. We looked at that and we said, no, they don't really know for sure. So we're going to add more to it. And we were constrained by the federal acquisition reg that you couldn't put too much of a fudge factor in there above and beyond. So we went to the max fudge factor. We added on to what they said they had, and we knew that we were still going to be wrong. And as it turned out, as the integrators, the CDM contractors rolled in and they installed these tools, no surprise, we found even more stuff connected to the network than what folks thought they originally did. To the tune of about, last I checked, it was about $70 million worth of additional items that we found that we had to work towards licensing. But that's, you know, a normal step of the evolutionary process of getting a handle on your assets. And then once you have a handle on your assets and who's on the network and what's going on, then you can make informed risk decisions as to, hey, why do I have that asset on there? Maybe I need to turn it off or go to a cloud computing environment, do virtualization. There's plenty of goodness that's going to come out of this in the end, but you got to make the initial upfront investment. And I think that's really the power of CDM, is it's that upfront concerted investment to get things done right.
So as someone who's definitely been around the .gov and .mil space long enough, you spent some time in the private sector now, you know how these things go, how these rollouts work. What's a more reasonable timeline for really getting to the end of phase 3?
Well, frankly, I think we're about 10 years late on phase 3, based on my experience with the .mil, but it is what it is. And I'm glad that, we got great support from Congress. The departments and agencies are moving out on it. It's a really good thing that we're actually doing this. So I think that within the next 3 years, I'm looking forward to seeing it not only in phase 3, but I want to see phase 4 accelerated. And phase 4 is all about data protection and making sure that that data is protected from creation to destruction.
Excellent. So shifting gears a little bit, from your time as the federal CISO, what were some of the initiatives that you got started that you really hope that the new administration continues working on, whether it's something that you've heard that they're not going to be working on anymore, you'd like them to restart, or is there anything that was something, a bit of your baby or something that you wanted to make sure keeps going?
Yeah, I don't think we have time on this call to go through the whole list, but let me tell you a few things that I think are really important and need to be at the top of the agenda. One of the things that I was really pleased with was the fact that we were able to kickstart and move forward on multi-factor authentication for privileged user accounts. And I think combined with the CDM phases 1, 2, and 3, I'd like to make sure that we are in fact governing that well and making sure that privileged user accounts are in fact managed with multi-factor authentication. When we did our big push, we were able to take that number from a self-reported 32% to a reported over 90% of all privileged user accounts. Frankly, we needed CDM tools to be put in place so that we could actually validate and audit those self-reported figures. But the fact that we got it on the agendas of the seniors and we were able to work it as a risk management issue was a very good thing. So multi-factor authentication is one. Two is we need to do better segmentation of our networks. We have so many flat networks, and for practical purposes, what that means is if somebody gets inside that network, either an insider or an external attacker, they can run rampant across the entire network. We need to segment our network, and that's one of the US CERT's top 5 best practices. So segmenting is critically important, and frankly, great companies like Cyxtera have got new capabilities that we need to introduce, where Cyxtera, with our software-defined perimeter, we can do fine granularity segmentation down to a segment of 1. So if I'm talking with you and I've got that communication link, if in fact you're a bad guy and you defeat me, you got nowhere else to go. The rest of the network's invisible to you. These new technologies we need to be able to introduce, and getting into CDM phase 4 is critically important in moving forward. And then the last thing is I think we need to really harden the workforce. One and done training for annual cyber refresher training, where you watch a video that really does not tug at your heartstrings or identify what kind of information you really need to defend, is just not going to work. It's insufficient. I think cyber risk management training should be a continual process. You should be having exercises, drills. Leaders should be training their people as to, hey, here's the critical information that we need to defend. And it's not just on the computer. It's also in paper. It's in communication on the phones and the like. It's part of a broader risk management construct, and we really need to train our people better so that they're hardened not to click those links, not to spill the beans over the phone, not to mishandle paper, not to leave a laptop full of social security numbers unattended in the backseat of your car. Some simple things, but hardening the workforce gives you the best return on investment.
Excellent. And that's a nice transition to actually the last topic I want to talk about, which is workforce centric, but not the everyday workforce, the hygiene that you need to do for everybody in government, but the people at the top. We had a story recently on Fifth Domain about the vacant cyber official political appointee positions right now and what that means. We've got some particularly important vacancies. Now we have the DHS secretary is now vacant as John Kelly moves over to be chief of staff of the White House. We also, the NPPD, that's undersecretary, is still vacant. We still have vacancies at the Department of Defense, at now the State Department, and in the intelligence community. how important is it to get those politically appointed positions staffed, and what can the administration do to find the right people to do that?
Well, that's the acme of all skill, is finding the right people to put into the right place. And you don't necessarily want to rush towards failure. You want to make sure that you, in fact, do have the right people who are well qualified. But that said, it's been 7 months now since we've had that change of administration. And certainly, I think not having those senior leaders in a position is, in fact, starting to add drag and not necessarily is as helpful as we need to be. I've always been one of the ones who said, if you don't have a rudder in the water or in the tail end of your plane, you're not necessarily going in the directions that you want to go in the manner you want to go to. Now, our senior civilians in government are there for a reason. And those SESs, the Senior Executive Service, are there to help us provide continuity. And that's one of the reasons why the Congress authorized the Senior Executive Service Corps, so that we could, in fact, have continuity as we move from one administration to the next. Many of those folks have been doing a great job. And maybe we want to consider taking some of them and elevating and taking out that acting name for those who are truly, worthy of those positions. But I think it's really important as we focus in on some of those vacancies, taking a look at the Chief Information Officer and the Chief Information Security Officer are critically important and need to be pushed up towards the top for filling those positions because of the influence and the impact across the federal government. We really need somebody of the Tony Scott to go out there as the Federal Chief Information Officer and meet the needs of the Federal Information Security Management Act that Congress has said, hey, we want you to pay attention to this and fix these problems in the federal government when it comes to IT. And likewise, when it comes to a Chief Information Security Officer, if in fact we say that cybersecurity is a top priority, you need to invest and get the person in there who understands the entire federal government cyber landscape and can help us buy down the risk that it is currently out there towards the people's information. So I would push the CIO and the CISO position towards the top of the agenda as we take a look at those vacancies. We really need to put the pedal to the metal and get those positions filled.
In that vein, if you could, just because you're the only person to have sat in that position, we went the entire history of the U.S. government without having a federal system. Now, obviously, the past isn't the present for very real reasons, but how important is this position? We didn't have one for a long time. You were there for a short period, and we haven't had one since. Is this, just how critical is this?
Well, let's take a look at, over the past 243 years, we really didn't have an internet-enabled government for all that long. And, as more and more of the federal government became automated, as we started having more public-facing delivery of services, such as web-enabled services and the like, really the landscape has changed over the years. And people are expecting government to be accessible and open and transparent online. And then further, we cut a lot of people that previously were doing stuff, and we're actually providing more service to the people of the United States, being more open and transparent through that web presence, through the automated services and the like. But that also exposed us to a greater risk. I think one of the reasons why President Obama elected to follow the private sector's best practice of having a Chief Information Security Officer, which, oh, by the way, that position was created, 20 plus years ago in the private sector. It only took us 20 years to catch up. Is
not bad for government.
Well, the risk got to a level where it became evident to President Obama and others, and you could talk to Representative Langevin in Congress, for example, and many other of the congressional leaders who have said, hey, we really needed to have this capability. We don't want another OPM-like attack. We have too many leakers that are out there who are mishandling classified material. We have information management issues where we want to be able to be an open and transparent government that protects the people's information while still preserving privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties. I think you really do need to have a chief information security officer that's keeping an eye on that and choreographing all the activities of the different departments and agencies. So yeah, I think it's important that the administration fills the position, but I also think that the Congress needs to step up to the table and authorize and empower the position through legislation. Right now, the position is kind of subtly mentioned in FISMA, but not by title. I think there needs to be some clarity, and Congress needs to step up on that and do their share too, as doing the proper oversight.
Excellent. And then just to wrap up, one more time, can you give us a holistic view from your time in government? What is the state of cybersecurity within the federal government?
Well, it's better than it was, but it's not as much. It's not as good as we need it to be and we want it to be. I think that as we take a look at where we are now, as opposed to where we were, let's say, 5 years ago, some positives are that first of all, we recognize that cybersecurity is part of an enterprise risk issue. It's not just a technology issue. If you go in the Wayback Machine, 5 years ago, a lot of folks were just looking at cybersecurity as a technology issue for the kids in the server room. Now, cybersecurity, in the aftermath of the OPM breach and other, stunning issues that have, hit the headlines in both the public sector and the private sector, now cybersecurity is in fact something that is on the agenda of the executives and the boards. And things that are on the agenda of boards and the officers of companies, as well as within government and their counterparts, that helps drive decisions that help drive results. So that's the second positive, and we need to capitalize on that. And then third is we are now starting to see, and I think that this administration can really drive the ball across the line on this, in the fact that taking a look at not having siloed activities, but shared services, leveraging newer technologies like cloud computing, software-defined perimeters, massive analytics, and big data. That can really change the landscape for the better in protecting the people's information while still making sure that our government is open and transparent to us, the shareholders, the people of the United States.
Excellent. General Touhill, First Federal CISO, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me.